Saturn being there, no way it's gonna be 100% happy ending. Yeah, I think that we should be preparing ourselves for a bit of a maybe tragic sad ending here. With the way Oda is writing One Piece at the moment, there's been an emphasis on re-establishing the world government as an actual force to be afraid of. Like you thought these emperors were bad. Well, here's 6 shadow beasts, 3 admirals, and 1 distinguished gentleman with a preference for moon-based facial hair. I think that Saturn is going to be a wake-up call not just for the crew, but for us as well. Because we might have reached the pinnacle of piracy, but the endgame threat goes far beyond that. And I can't help but feel that Saturn is here to give us just a little bit of a taste of that, which means that we're probably in for a bittersweet ending. I don't think it'll be devastating like when the crew was split up, but this isn't going to have that Wano fairy tale ending. This is the introduction of the final saga, so we're probably going to feel some kind of threat. At first I thought the robot would lift the Sunny, but Franky Shogun has that covered. Now I think the ancient robot will fight Saint Saturn Shadow Beast for them to escape. Alright, so we're basically predicting a showdown of ancient relics. Who turns to dust first? Ancient metal or ancient biosac? Regardless of whether or not they fight though, I am so looking forward to Saint Saturn's reaction. When Saturn sees the Iron Giant, he is surely going to know that this is a much bigger problem than anyone else around him realizes. And it might even provide the impetus for everyone else to get away. Saturn, he sees robot, he goes, Then orders an immediate change of target because he sees the much larger threat of letting the Iron Giant run loose into the world again. Something I've also been thinking a bit about lately is the dynamic of light versus darkness, specifically in regards to how the Iron Giant seems to be powered by, general sun godliness, and how in contrast to that, the Elder Stars and Imu's abilities have been portrayed pretty much as pure darkness. At the very least, metaphorically, they all seem like clear natural enemies, but also that might be true physically, which would make someone like Blackbeard a true aberration, coming from the D-Clan with all of its light implications, but having access to the power of darkness as well. If Saturn does start acting, I think Sanji or Franky are going to be the first Straw Hats to meet an Elder. This is always so weird to think about. The 5 Elder Stars, they've been in the series since Jaya. They are so ingrained into the fabric of the series, and yet also so completely isolated from it. Sometimes I forget that almost no one has ever met or interacted with them, which is why I'm very keen to see any of the Straw Hats meet Saint Saturn. Because other than Robin and Jinbei, I don't even know how aware the rest of the Straw Hats are that the 5 Elders even exist. Ignorant definitely isn't the right word. I mean, it is the right word in some cases, but for most of the crew, they're just hyperfixated on their dreams. They pay little to no attention to the world around them. So in the case of Franky and Sanji, their reactions would probably be something along the lines of, "Hey, who let this old man out of his retirement village?" Meanwhile, right behind them, Stella would be like, fuck. Also, Franky and Stella had a funny interaction in chapter 1093. Stella says, "Mates, it looks like Bonney was knocked down to the Fabrio phase. What happened there?" And then Franky just replies with, "Oh wow, she survived? That's pretty awesome. I saw her get kicked by an admiral and fly to her certain death. Lol." And I guess that's why Franky has now joined the Bonney rescue team. Because he's like, yeah, maybe I should have tried just a little bit harder. Did Luffy just eat Kizaru's laser and turn into a disco ball? Gear 5 just keeps getting wackier. So this is something I didn't touch on in the chapter review because, quite frankly, I wasn't quite sure what happened at first. And even as I record this video, I'm still not 100% sure. Luffy intercepts Kizaru's beam and he appears to reflect it, partially through his eyes, which makes my eyes hurt just thinking about it. It gave me a very Superman or Cyclops sort of vibe, that insanely uncontrollable power emanating from Luffy's focal orbs. I bet he really regrets not making those goggles now. He wasted that trick fighting a leopard who couldn't even shoot laser beams. In fact, leopard tech is so ancient that they don't even have bullets. All he can do is pretend to be a bullet with his finger, pew pew pew. It's a unique interaction though, because Kizaru's attacks generally result in a laser penetration style effect or just a big old boom. So it's unusual to see whatever's happening here, I guess being absorbed and or reflected. And look, I don't want to get too crazy here, but this is the sun god fruit we're talking about. So with that in mind, the question I would pose to Kizaru is, why are you trying to fight the sun with light? That's like trying to fight battle against the ocean with a bottle of water. If anything, this could fuel Luffy and make him temporarily even more powerful, like charging his sun battery back up to full, or perhaps give Luffy ideas about how he can use light himself in the future. As it is, I'm half hoping that Luffy will think that Kizaru's light clones were such a fun idea that he goes ahead and makes his own, because there's no logical force stopping that ability from being used, or any ability really. Where can I find that SBS quote about arse? Right. So if you missed the chapter review, I explained how Oda is legitimately using Egghead Island as an opportunity to expand his skills as an artist. And one of his big focuses of the arc is learning how to draw quote, sexy buttocks, which you can find in the SBS of volume 106, page, I think 112 to be precise. If Kizaru was so fast, why didn't he catch all the Straw Hats at Sabadi? He should know Kuma's power and be able to get out and catch them. You know, that's an interesting question, not the one you asked because Rayleigh was there, but the question of which ability is faster, Kuma's repel powers or Kizaru's light movement. And it's a very potentially relevant question to ask because we might be heading towards a similar situation for Egghead. If Kuma comes to the island and repels everyone away, surely it needs to be faster or Kizaru will just catch up to them. Forget realistic light speed here for a second because that's never what we operate with. I think that from what we've seen, Kuma's powers move people faster. Or at the very least, whoever moves first can't be caught by who moves second. Because I suppose the issue is that Kuma's abilities still move people fast enough to make it seem like they've been teleported. So even if Kizaru could theoretically move faster than that, it doesn't really matter because he doesn't know where they went. They just blinked away. It could have gone in any direction. But on Sabadi, however, there was also the small issue of Dark King Silver's Rayleigh. If Kizaru had tried to pursue any of the crew, then I'm sure that Rayleigh would have prevented it. Surprised you didn't mention that Vegapunk called Bonney a little girl again. Look, I was tempted to, but I feel like I'm just repeating myself a bit with this point. When it comes to old men like Vegapunk or Saint Saturn, everyone is young compared to them. And in one translation, Stella even called Franky a strapping young lad. But there's a lot of people who are now 100% certain that Bonney is a child. And a lot of that is due to the spoilers that came out before the chapter. Which, to explain that, in case you're not familiar with spoiler culture, before the chapter comes out, there is an online summary that gets posted by a leaker, basically reporting in their own words what happens in the chapter, or at least the major events of the chapter. And this week, one of the leakers said the following: Vegapunk refers to Bonney as a little child. He talks about her as if she's a really small kid. It seems Bonney's real age may be younger than we think. So a lot of people took this to mean that the Bonney child theory was confirmed before we even saw the manga pages, all because of this subjective interpretation. And this is why you need to be careful with what people say on the internet, because the actual chapter doesn't back that up as strongly as the leaker implied. I personally still think that Child Bonney is a very solid idea, and it does seem like we're heading in that direction potentially, but nothing in chapter 1093 makes me think that more than I already did. And if you'd like to see what the idea is all about, then there is a whole video discussing it on this channel. This will be a bad prediction. Kuma is the hidden top of the authority order of Pacifista. Mate, you're too hard on yourself. It's not a bad idea at all. I just don't see why, how, when, where, and all of the other question words. But I do think you raise a good point with a hidden top authority. I just don't necessarily think that that top authority was programmed. What I immediately thought of when I read this comment was Luffy's power over S-Snake. Due to the way that Boa Hancock naturally takes to Luffy, he really is at the top of the command hierarchy for her. If it came down to being given an order from Saturn and a request from Luffy, I suspect that she would fall on the side of Luffy. And I think that all of the Pacifista could have a similar thing going on, but with Bonney. They are, after all, her various fathers, and I imagine that this has to be at least true of Esper, but deep down, if there is any remnant of Kuma-based humanity in any of the Pacifista, then the one thing that could commandeer their programming is a heartfelt plea from Bonney. So imagine this, right? Saint Saturn, bad old man, he takes command of the Pacifista and he orders them to kill Jewelry Bonney. Very bad old man thing to do. In response to this, Bonney sees her fathers all about to kill her, and she starts crying. She breaks down and she pleads with them like, no dad, no, don't do this. And then you know what they do? They don't kill her. And maybe they don't rebel completely, but there's still that hint of humanity stopping them. What if Luffy makes a light switch and turns off Kizaru? This idea is so stupid that I actually want it to happen, even if it doesn't work. In fact, especially if it doesn't work. Some of Luffy's best ideas are the ones that just fail completely. Like how he tried to eat Crocodile. Luffy is very scientific in combat. It's all about trial and error. So Luffy could conjure a light switch, turn Kizaru off briefly, and then he comes back very confused. But this does lead to a very serious question though. Does Luffy even know what a light switch is? With the One Piece live action, an intriguing Oda brain nugget was dropped because the production team asked him whether or not electricity is widely used in the One Piece world. And Oda's response was, I've never really thought about it, but probably? And I genuinely struggle to think of things that are powered by electricity in the One Piece world. So we have the Arc Maxim, which was powered by Enel's electricity, as well as the ancient moon civilization he found, which I guess means that the automata from Karakuri Island are powered by electricity, since their moon equivalents were, but also maybe not. Because you'd think that Egghead Island is heavily electric, but Lilith explained that their primary power source is fire. Meanwhile, other futuristic tech like Franky is powered by cola. And I guess the Pacifista are probably electrical, maybe? I just don't know that for sure. Oda's never addressed it because clearly he himself has never thought of it. I can't help but think Lilith is about to do something crazy that Franky will be blamed for. Maybe with a bounty increase to match. Yeah, that's a good point. Right now, Lilith is anything but anonymous because Franky's bounty poster is actually an image of Franky Shogun. So whatever Lilith ends up doing inside it, the Marines are going to assume that this is Franky. And Lilith, as we know, is very trigger happy. And the Franky Shogun comes equipped with a beautiful suite of weapons for the more violently inclined of us. On the other hand, right now, Franky has the advantage and/or curse of anonymity. The Marines will see him and they might even mistake him for a Vegapunk invention or even one of the satellites. Anyone else notice that Robin is getting less and less protection? She's injured and now only has Chopper, Usopp, and Nami. I think this is cause for concern. You know, that whole group there is insanely vulnerable at the moment. And that also includes Stussy, who they're assumedly responsible for as well. So we've got our two heaviest hitters in this particular cohort relegated to the duty of lying on the floor. The whole monster trio is occupied. Luffy with an admiral, Zoro with Lucci, and Sanji now going to rescue Bonney, thus leaving the weakling trio very much on their own. And I would also include Edison in this discussion. 2 Vegapunks have already gone down, and I really would not be surprised to see more die before Egghead is over, including Stella, leaving maybe 1 Vegapunk to carry on the will of the others. Like say Lilith, weirdly enough, she's probably in the best position to survive right now, and she'd be a fun mad scientist to have to rely on. But the others, they're very vulnerable. Stella and Atlas at this moment could be driving to their deaths, and Edison, that boy just needs some better protection. Although someone who is forgotten in this comment is Brook, and his usefulness should never be underestimated. Pretty much ever since he joined the crew, he's been in the running for MVP of most arcs he's been involved in, despite not getting into any of the really big fights. And in fact, a really cool Brook moment that I forgot to talk about in the chapter review is when Kizaru made his way back to the control room. Brook wasn't scared at all or intimidated. He immediately drew his sword ready to strike Kizaru, much like he did on Sabati. And more credit because Nami was also ready to attack, by the way. When Kizaru was holding Usopp, she had the climb attack charged and ready to strike, which that would have been fun to see. How Nami's lightning interacts with Kizaru's light. And who knows, maybe we could have gotten one step closer to answering the ultimate question of which magical fruit power is truly better, Kizaru's light or Enel's lightning. But I think that this group of, look, I don't want to call them leftovers, but this gaggle of straw hats that were certainly in the last round of draft picks, they will probably have to face their own unique challenge. Now that the Frontier Dome is down, that could be anything. That could be the Marines, that could be the Blackbeard Pirates. It could be the Seraphim if they get free, it could be York if she gets free. It might even be Kaku if he manages to get out of his bubble. There are a lot of things that could go wrong for them from here. However, there's still also an unaccounted for heavy hitter with Jinbei. In this chapter, we saw him with Sanji making preparations to leave, which explains why Sanji wasn't there to help against Kizaru when he originally broke through. And it's situations like this that make me feel like the Straw Hats should just have a general rule. Whenever the crew splits into groups, each group either needs a Luffy, a Zoro, a Sanji, or a Jinbei. Because otherwise, this is what happens. An admiral appears and then it's up to Usopp to do something. With each new chapter, I like Sentomaru more. Me too, which is surprising because Sentomaru is a character who I traditionally have never cared about, which isn't to say that I didn't like him. It's more that he was always a very neutral existence. On Sabati, he was very much overshadowed by Kizaru, Kuma, and Rayleigh, and at the Paramount War, he was even more overshadowed. I often forget that Sentomaru was even at Marineford. And then during Return to Sabati, look, he did get to thwack Damara Black on the head, which is pretty funny. But again, he didn't really do or express much. And now with that lengthy but not particularly noteworthy history, I right now am genuinely concerned that he might die, because Oda, to his credit, is getting a lot more comfortable with actually killing characters off, which is great for the story because I hate fake deaths and I think it's the #1 problem with One Piece. But it's also not great because it means that people I like can now die. But that's great because it means that I actually feel some tension. And right now, the 3 most likely candidates for me for another round of death doing are Stella, Kuma, and Sentomaru. With Sentomaru, he's probably the least likely of the 3, but also I can see Oda doing it because he is a bit of a throwaway character in the grand scheme of things. But since we're going down to save Bonney anyway, we could probably pick up Sentomaru along the way. With Kuma though, this has to be his last stand. If he can even stand anymore, he's only got 1 foot now. And as for Stella, look, shonen manga has just always made me fear for old figures who put themselves in danger for the sake of the youth. It almost never ends well. But you let me know in the comments, who is your bet to die next on Egghead Island?